Good evening and welcome to ScholarNet 7. My name is Patryk Witkowski and I'll be reading the news for you today. Our first story is the Ukraine update, day 912 of a conflict, where Russian forces mounted 53 attacks on the Pokrovsk front in Donetsk Oblast on Thursday, as Moscow pressed to take the town, which Kiev's military described as the main focus of the invaders' effort in Ukraine. Elsewhere in eastern Ukraine, Russian forces attacked the Ukrainian positions near the settlement of New York. A ferry loaded with fuel tanks sank in the Russian port of Kavkaz in southern Krasnodar region on Thursday after a Ukrainian attack, local authorities said. Kavkaz port is one of Russia's largest on the Black Sea, exporting as well as sending fuel across to the Russian-occupied Ukrainian territory of Crimea. Ukraine's Air Force said it used a US-made GBU-39 bomb to strike a Russian platoon command post in the Kursk region of Russia, which Ukraine has invaded. The model is a precision-guided small-diameter bomb with wings that unfold so it can glide to its target using built-in navigation after being dropped from a plane. The Biden administration will send about $125 million in new military aid to Ukraine, including air defense missiles, HIMARS ammunition, Javelin anti-tank missile systems, and other anti-armor missiles, counter-drone and counter-electronic warfare systems and equipment, 155mm and 105mm artillery ammunition, vehicles, and other equipment. Officials said the weapons were being provided through Presidential Drawdown Authority, which means they are taken from Pentagon stockpiles and can be delivered more quickly. A Russian strike killed a 56-year-old man and injured 8 others in the Kharkiv region of northeast Ukraine, the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office said on Thursday. Russian drone attacks killed 2 civilians and wounded a third, while a guided bomb attack killed 2 people, said prosecutors and officials in Sumy, which borders Russia's Kursk region that Ukrainian troops have partly occupied. A Ukrainian drone attack on Thursday at the Marinovka airbase in Russia's Volgograd region causes fires and ammunition explosions, which lasted for hours. Ukraine's SBU security service said it carried out a remote raid on the base, home to about 30 Su-34 and Su-35 fighter jets. Ukraine's Border Guard service said on Thursday that Kyiv had not observed any signs of Belarusian troops or equipment movements near their shared border since Minsk announced it was sending additional forces to the area. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Thursday said no conflict could be resolved on a battlefield, as he spoke in Poland on the eve of his visit to Ukraine. Modi will be the first Indian Prime Minister to make the Ukraine trip and is the first in 45 years to visit Poland. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, said on Thursday its Director General, Rafael Grossi, would assess the situation at Kursk nuclear power plant during his visit next week. Ukraine ratified the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court on Wednesday, opening the possibility of more prosecutions of Russian officials for war crimes. Membership of the ICC is a requirement for joining the European Union, which Ukraine hopes to do after it was formally accepted as the candidate in June 2022. Moving on to our Israel and Gaza latest, where at least 40,265 Palestinians have been killed and 93,144 have been injured in Gaza since the 7th of October, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. A 10-month-old baby in Gaza was paralyzed by polio, the first case of polio in Gaza in 25 years. The polio virus was detected last month in wastewater samples in Deir al-Balah and Khan Yunis. With UNRWA readying to launch 2 rounds of a polio vaccination campaign at the end of the month, the Ministry of Health in Gaza emphasized on Friday that a ceasefire was necessary for a success in inoculating Palestinians against the virus. Quote, the vaccination campaign will not be successful alone in the absence of sanitary water, personal hygiene supplies, and sewage water spread among the tents of the displaced, and in the absence of a healthy environment, the ministry posted on Facebook. Ceasefire talks continued in Cairo on Friday, with Israeli negotiators participating, quote, to advance a hostage release agreement. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's spokesperson Omer Dostri told AFP late on Thursday. A main sticking point remains Hamas's long-standing demand for a complete Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, which Netanyahu has opposed. Osama Badran, a Hamas official, has accused Netanyahu of refusing to agree to a final truce accord for Gaza, saying that Netanyahu's insistence that troops remain on the Philadelphia border strip reflects Netanyahu's refusal to reach a final agreement. 30 UK-based doctors, nurses, and medical staff who volunteered in Gaza have written an open letter to UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, calling for a total end to arms sales to Israel. Successive Israeli evacuation orders in Gaza, including 12 just this month, have displaced 90% of its 2.1 million residents since the Israeli-Hamas war began last October. Often, multiple times, the top United Nations humanitarian official for the Palestinian territory says. Muhannad Hadi said the evacuation orders are endangering civilians instead of protecting them. They are forcing families to flee again, often under the fire and with the few belongings they can carry with them in an ever-shrinking area, was the quote. And that is crowded and unsafe, he went on to explain. Netanyahu is reported to have met today with 6 hostages who were released from Hamas captivity in November, according to Haaretz. All 6 of the released hostages still have family being held by Hamas. Shifting to the UK, where the Metropolitan Police drops investigations into the election gambling allegations. Metropolitan Police will not pursue any charges of misconduct in public office against political figures who potentially used inside information to bet on the general election debate, they have announced. However, a Metropolitan Police statement said the Gambling Commission will continue to look into whether any possible offences had been committed under the Gambling Act, which is overseen by the betting watchdog. The investigation began after it was revealed that Craig Williams, who was Rishi Sunak's parliamentary private secretary and a Tory MP before losing his seat in July, placed a £100 bet on a July election 3 days before the Prime Minister named the date. Williams and another candidate, Laura Saunders, eventually lost the formal support of the party after it emerged that they were being investigated by the Gambling Commission. The Gambling Commission is also examining bets allegedly placed by Tony Lee, the Conservatives' campaigns director, who is married to Saunders. Nick Mason, the Tories' chief data officer, and Russell George, a Tory member of the Welsh Parliament, who represents the same area as Williams did. 7 Met police officers were also placed under investigation over allegations they used inside information to bet on the election date. Alongside the Commission inquiries, the Met examined whether any other offences, particularly misconduct in the public office, could apply. However, they concluded that, based on the assessment of the evidence and the advice from the CPS, it was determined that the high bar for misconduct in public office to be proven was not met. The statement concluded by saying it was therefore been agreed between the Met and the Gambling Commission that the more appropriate criminal offences to progress with would be those under the Gambling Act. The Met's involvement in the investigation of any criminal matters will now come to an end, and the cases will be passed back to the Gambling Commission for further investigation. Our next story is the average UK household annual energy bill to rise by 10% to £1,717 from October. Households in the UK will begin the run-up to winter with a 10% increase of their energy bills after Ofgem, the industry regulator, increased its cap on gas and electricity prices from October. Under the new price cap, after the new price cap, the average annual dual fuel energy bill will rise to £1,717 a year, up £149 from its current level of £1,568, which has been in place since July. The price cap is set every quarter by Ofgem, the energy regulator for Great Britain, and imposes a maximum on how much suppliers can charge their 28 million household customers per unit of gas and electricity. It is expressed in terms of how much the average home would pay at this rate for their typical annual energy use, which means a cold autumn and winter could push bills even higher if households need to keep the heating on for longer. The new cap is broadly in line with the costs of energy last autumn and winter, when it rose to £1,834 between October and December, and £1,928 from January to March. However, bills will remain well above the cap set before Russia's war on Ukraine triggered a global energy market shock, when the winter price was £1,216. The regulator revealed the price cap weeks after the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, set out plans to restrict the winter fuel allowance. Reeves said it would no longer be universal and only pensioners on means-tested benefits would qualify this winter. The allowance, which is worth between £100 and £300, was paid to 11.4 million pensioners in 8.4 million households in the winter of 2022 to 2023. Changes are expected to leave hundreds of thousands of pensioners facing significantly higher energy costs over the colder months, according to fuel poverty campaigners at National Energy Action. The news of the energy price cap increase has drawn widespread criticism of Sir Keir Starmer, who had promised to freeze energy prices before the election in July. Shona Robison to make statement in Parliament on Scotland's finances. Finance Secretary Shona Robison will update Parliament after recess, outlining the urgent action being taken to address profound financial pressures. In a letter to the Finance and Public Administration Committee, Ms. Robison said it was necessary to reduce expenditure to deliver sustainable finances, particularly as it was unclear whether the UK government would fully fund its public sector pay deals. The Cabinet Secretary said she is working closely with counterparts in Wales and Northern Ireland, along with the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, to ensure that all avenues are explored to navigate the financial challenges in the months and years ahead. In the letter, Ms. Robinson said, "I am working with my cabinet colleagues to agree the necessary actions to reduce expenditure and ensure our finances are on a sustainable footing. Further to this, additional measures are now necessary following the UK Treasury's recent audit of public spending and lack of clarity over whether their decision to deliver pay review body recommendations will be fully funded. Over the last few weeks, the Scottish Government has set out that we had no choice but to replicate the UK Government's decision to restrict eligibility for winter fuel payment to older people." The UN calls on UK to curb rise in racist hate speech by politicians and public figures. The UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination has said that the UK government must act to curb a sharp increase in the use of racist hate speech by UK politicians and high-profile public figures. Ministers must adopt comprehensive measures to discourage and combat racist hate speech, and xenophobic to hate course by political and public figures, and ensure that such cases are effectively investigated and sanctioned. The UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination recommended in a report. The UN officials declined to name which politicians or public figures had made comments triggering the committee's concern, but added there are so many credible reports of racist comments by high-profile individuals that there was no doubt that the issue is a serious one in the UK. Presenting the report on Friday based on a 4-year review in the UK's record on tackling race discrimination, the committee highlighted very troubling manifestations of racism within the UK, flagging particular concern about racial profiling in stop-and-search practices and the excessive and deadly use of force by law enforcement. Officials sought to identify trends where the UK's record on eliminating racial discrimination had deteriorated since 2016, when the UN body last published its research. In noting new concerns about recurring racist acts, violence, and hate speech against ethnic and ethno-religious minorities, migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers by extremist far-right and white supremacist individuals. It was concerned about a rise of xenophobic rhetoric in the print and broadcasting media and on social media. In Europe, the French left is to demand what Macron French left to demand that Macron let it form a government. Leaders of France's left-wing coalition have demanded that Emmanuel Macron agrees to let them form the country's new government, as the president holds a series of meetings to break the 6-week political deadlock. Macron has already rejected the New Popular Front's NFP candidate to be appointed prime minister, saying he wants a government leader with broad and stable support to avoid a parliamentary vote of no confidence that would cause further political chaos. NFP representatives have accused the president of dragging his feet over appointing a new PM, accusing him of serious and damaging inaction, and failing to accept the results of a snap general election he himself called. France has been in a political stalemate since the beginning of July after the legislative election failed to produce a majority. The vote divided the Assemblée Nationale, the lower house of parliament, into 3 roughly equal blocks: left, center, and far right. Sorry, that's left, center, and far right. None of which has a working majority. The centrist government, led by Gabriel Attal, resigned after the July election, but has remained to oversee a minimum service of administration during the Olympic truce called by the president. The parties have been invited to the Élysée based on the number of MPs they had elected for what the spokesperson said were hoped to be loyal and sincere consultation with the aim of moving things forward in the interest of a country. This morning, Macron met representatives of the MFP, which had produced civil servant Lucie Castetz, 37, as its preferred candidate to become PM, although Macron has already rejected her nomination. Macron met with members of centre and centre-right parties, including the conservative Les Républicains, this afternoon, and will meet with far-right representatives, including those from a national rally on Monday. In America, Kamala Harris accepts Democrats' nomination. Kamala Harris accepts the Democratic presidential nomination on Thursday with a sweeping, pointed speech in which she vowed to prosecute the case against Donald Trump and carry the country to a brighter and fairer future. In an address that balanced optimism with scathing criticism of her opponent, Harris acknowledged her unlikely path to the nomination and extended her hand to voters of all political ideologies who believe in America's promise. Harris would make history if elected as the first woman, first black woman, and first Asian American woman to serve as president, but she instead focused on the history that the country could change in November. Quote, "Our nation, with this election, has a precious, fleeting opportunity to move past the bitterness, cynicism, and divisive battles of the past. A chance to chart a new way forward, not as members of any one party or faction, but as Americans," Harris told thousands of Democrats in Chicago on Thursday. She then said to roaring applause, "On behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination for President of the United States of America." Harris's speech came just 1 month after the US Vice President launched her campaign following Joe Biden's withdrawal from a presidential race. Harris has enjoyed a wave of enthusiasm since entering the race, as most polls now show her pulling slightly ahead of Trump in the key battleground states that will determine the outcome of the election. Throughout the speech, Harris implicitly and explicitly contrasted herself with her opponent, warning that Trump's return to the White House would resurrect the chaos and calamity of his first presidential term. She condemned the former president's efforts to overturn the result of the 2020 presidential election, blaming him for the January 6th attack on the US Capitol, and reminded voters of the many legal battles since leaving office. Harris then led the crowd, packed to full capacity in Chicago's United Center, in a chant of "We're not going back." The chant has become a recurring feature of Harris's campaign rallies in the past month. Harris presented herself as a realistic and practical leader who would lean on her background as a prosecutor to govern based on common sense and equality. Harris was arguably most forceful when it came to discussing foreign policy, as she promised to stand strong with Ukraine and accused Trump of aligning himself with autocrats. "I will not cozy up to tyrants and dictators like Kim Jong-un who are rooting for Trump because they know how he is easy to manipulate with flattery and favors," Harris said. "As president, I will never waver in defense of America's security and ideals because, in the enduring struggle between democracy and tyranny, I know where I stand and where the United States of America belongs." On Gaza, she said, "President Biden and I are working to end this war such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination." Back in Scotland, Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park will suspend standing orders to hear full arguments on Flamingo Land. The board of Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park have announced that they will suspend their standing orders in order to hear the full arguments in the case of Flamingo Land's Loch Lomond resort proposals. Local Green MSP Ross Greer, who has led the campaign against Flamingo Land, has welcomed the news that adequate time will be given to those opposing the mega resort plans at a public hearing on 16th September. Mr. Greer had previously raised concerns that the park and Scottish Government that the normal format of park board meetings, which would have given objectors to the proposals other than the community council just 5 minutes in total to speak, and would be unacceptable for such a high-profile hearing. Given the 145,000 objections lodged so far, this format would have resulted in only 0.002 seconds per objector. The proposals for a luxury resort in the banks of Loch Lomond at Balloch are the most objected to plans in Scottish history. Responding to the news of a public hearing being extended and live-streamed, Mr. Greer said, "I'm glad the National Park has decided to suspend its standing orders, and allow for the substantial debate clearly required for a proposal as destructive as Flamingo Land. The long list of reasons for rejecting this mega resort included a flood risk, more than 250 additional cars on congested local roads at peak times, damage to local wildlife, and risk to existing local businesses. It is only right that every one of these points is given enough time to be carefully weighed up against Flamingo Land's spin. We will now arrange for a full team of experts, legal advisors, and local residents to present a comprehensive case against these daft plans. The decision to live stream proceedings is also a big improvement on the proposed 2019 hearing and will boost public confidence that this decision is being taken in an open and transparent manner. The national park has been given a difficult task, and I appreciate the work they are putting into ensuring the public's voice will be heard at what is probably the most high-profile planning hearing in Scottish history. The Scottish Government also welcomes improved pay offer in college disputes. The Scottish Government has welcomed an improved pay offer on the long-running colleges dispute. Commenting on the improved pay offer, Higher and Further Education Minister Graham Day said, "This is a hugely welcome development and comes after significant efforts on both sides to break the impasse and find a resolution to this dispute. This agreement would represent a strong package for college staff, despite the pressures on public finances, and I would hope that union members will accept this deal. I have sought to engage with both the employers and the union throughout this process, and this week agreed that provisions will be made in the 2025 to 2026 college budget allocations for an additional £4.5 million to support the cost of this pay deal. I know all sides want to minimize disruption to students who have now returned for the start of a new academic term, and that's why it's so pivotal that the dispute is settled." First Minister attends the Ukrainian Independence Day event in Edinburgh. First Minister John Swinney attended a ceremony to mark Ukrainian Independence Day at the Edinburgh City Chambers today. The First Minister joined members of Scotland's Ukrainian community to lay wreaths at a stone of remembrance in memory of those killed in Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In his speech, Mr. Sweeney stressed his support for Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity as he hailed the country's unity and heroism in defending it. In his speech, the First Minister paid tribute to the Scottish Ukrainian citizens who lived through World War II. Mr. Sweeney said, "While Russia repeats the worst mistakes of the past, Ukraine cries out to new generations of Europeans that we can no longer take these rights for granted. We must nurture them, we must respect them, we must be prepared to defend them. This is why Scotland will always support Ukrainian independence. That is why Scotland supports Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. That is why Scotland will always work with Ukraine towards the goal of true peace in Europe, allowing democracies, human rights, and the rule of law to hold strong, to succeed, and to be renewed. Therefore, as First Minister, I also serve you, the Ukrainian community, in Scotland, and it is an honor to do so. Slava Ukraina. Ukraini." And that does wrap us up for the evening. Before I go, I want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Right now, we urgently need to increase our donation if we are to be able to pay our bills. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but our income is just over £2,000, and we are now facing mounting debts. Please donate whatever you can afford. I've been Patryk Witkowski, reading the news bulletin for you today. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.